we're talking about the live streaming and on phones. I know that they're launching a new app for it. That I know. For the phone, there's going to be a new app. I think you can get, oh gosh, no. They have it on, I think we've put it up on the Facebook page. What is it if you have Android? You have to go through what? To get, there's one called the Church app or something like that. Ed just told me about it the last day or two, and they put something up on the Facebook page and on the Men's Impact page. Okay, well, apparently Sherry was trying to use just the one that she always uses on her phone this morning, and it wasn't working. So the old, okay. Yeah, YouTube's still working, so I would refer you to our Facebook page. I think it's on the main page, right? Okay, the Facebook group for the church, the app is there, and also it's on the men's. I know Ed put it up in a couple of the places there. So if you'd like to be able to use your phone, there's an app that's made just for it, and so the live streaming and all the rest. Yeah, that's the way we can leave it at that? Great. All right, so there we go. Book of Numbers. We are in chapter 6 tonight. And we'll get through, actually, by the time that we get to chapter 7, it's a very long chapter, but you'll notice it's repetitive for each one of the tribes. So we'll be able to move kind of quick through that. We'll go through the first portion of it, but we won't go through the redundancy because it really is pretty much just verbatim a repetition. But I'll explain what it is that exactly is going on. And it won't be long till we start to get to some of the more memorable things that happen as they started to move. What you have here is kind of the preparation for them to leave. And so they're going to consecrate the guys, but then they're going to start moving from place to place, and they'll begin to start having the things, the historical events that took place. So we'll get to those pretty quick. What we have and where we are in this particular part of the book of Numbers is the order of things. And so you'll see again, even in this, a little bit of repetition in the tribes and in the order of things. And so let's just get to chapter 6, and let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at it. So, Father, we thank you so much for gathering us here this evening, and we would ask, Lord, that you would be glorified in the teaching of your word tonight, and that as we study this part of history, much of it is understandable to us in some ways, and in other ways why you did what you did, and trying to fully understand the life of the people at this time is somewhat hidden from our eyes. And so we ask, Lord, of the things that we do know, that we may also recognize the importance of consecration to you and walking with you by faith, doing as you have instructed. And so we thank you. We give to you all praise this evening in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so chapter 6 begins this way. It says, "So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Now speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering to take a vow of a Nazirite to separate himself to the Lord." This is if somebody's going to do this. Now, we've heard this whole thing of the Nazirite vow. And probably the most famous one that you can imagine of the person that takes a Nazirite vow is Samson, right? So there's speculation also that Samuel may very well have been one who had a vow, but in both of those cases, it was done on their behalf. In this case, you'll notice that the same kind of consecration was to take place with them, with Nazirites that were of the priesthood. And now here are a few things when you start to think about it like that. If you go back and you look at the prohibitions that were on the life of the priests. If the priests were working and doing temple service, they weren't to be drinking. And as far as the high priest was concerned, there were some other things that he wasn't able to do, the way of defiling themselves with a dead body. The Levites, just the priests, were able to be around the dead bodies if they were family members. The high priest, none of that stuff. Same thing with the Nazirites. You're going to see that it was very, very strict. Now, what's different about this Notice in this that women are able to partake in a Nazirite vow as well. And it is for a limited amount of time, which you will see here. What we don't have for us is, well, what would be done for that vow? Why would the vow be taken? What was supposed to be being done? None of that is told to us. And it could be any variety of things, it would seem, but you're going to take the Nazir, that Nazirite, or that vow that is a one of consecration. I am dedicating and consecrating myself to the Lord, and I'm going to abstain from a number of things. The way that people will know that there is a Nazirite vow is you'll be able to tell with the men in particular that the hair was to grow out, but they would abstain from things. And so it was this way of consecration. They were swearing off these things in service to the Lord for some reason, for an indefinite amount of time, but it seemed to have, if you will, kind of a shelf life to it. As far as the Levites were concerned, they were always going to be part of that family. As far as their service in the priesthood, it was going to be for a specific amount of time, and we're going to get into that a little bit tonight too. But as far as the Nazirite, you could be of any of the tribes, and you could be a man or a woman, but if you're going to consecrate yourself, here is what you're supposed to do. So it tells us, again, verse 2, this is what Moses, you're to tell the children of Israel, say to them, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering to take a vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine or similar drink, and shall drink neither vinegar made from the wine, nor vinegar made from similar drink, neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine or the seed, from seed to skin. Now, the prohibition, again, it was pretty central. Even there, as you go there now and you tour around, and if you're going through the food that they'll put out for you at the hotels and whatnot, you can see raisins everywhere. And the fruits and all that stuff, that was just it was a staple to them. But you are going to abstain from all such things. Now, it says also, in verse 5, all the days of the vow of this separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy, or set apart, separate. Then he shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. So this is the outward sign of this person who's taking this vow. Once again, doesn't tell us what a vow would be for, but if a person is going to say, I consecrate or I separate myself to the use of the Lord, and they want to do this as a vow, not just like for a one-day kind of thing. This is over a sustained amount of time, and we don't really have any of the particulars. But if you're going to do such a thing, there was a lot more to it than just saying, I want to serve the Lord. Well, verse 6, all the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body, nor shall he make for himself will he make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother, for his brother or sister, when they die, because his separation to God is on his head, or it has been consecrated that way. So if you'll notice what even happens, if somebody just dies close to him, then the whole thing is kind of gone. But if somebody in the family is gone, there's no contact that goes on. Now the family, assuming that everybody's on the same page with this, they would understand, hey, this person has consecrated themselves to the Lord. And they could go ahead and break that vow at that particular time. But you'll see there's a lot of things that need to go on, even being done with the vow. Well, it says, he will, verse 8 rather, says, all the days of his separation he shall be holy to the Lord. So complete separation, complete consecration, a swearing off of all the kind of natural things that are prescribed here. They are to be removed from them as they have this time of their service. Now it says, now if anyone dies suddenly or very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on that day of his cleansing, and on the seventh day he shall shave it. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and the priest will offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, to make atonement for him, because he has sinned in regard to the corpse. And he shall sanctify his head on that same day. He shall consecrate to the Lord the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb of the first year of trespass offering, for a trespass offering, but the former days they shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. So talk about, now when you think about this and you look at it, the idea of living under the law was so rigid. Now again, it's what God gave them, so I can't fault it at all. This is not man's law. This is the law that God had given to them. But at the same time, we make mention of this quite often in this whole part of the Bible, that when God puts things in place and he says, this is how it's going to be, do you notice he leaves no wiggle room whatsoever? It is to be this way and this way only. Yeah, it's locked in. There is no way out of these things. And I always am reminded as I read these things, if only we were that careful not to take liberty with what we know in the New Testament sense. When God says this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And why it is that we try to find ways. Now, I'm not saying that in the way of accusing. I'm saying the church as a whole. It seems so, so make it up as you go kind of thing. Hey, we all live under grace. We don't live under the law. Yeah, well, that's not an excuse. As Paul would say, you don't use that as a cloak for your lasciviousness. That's just the King James way of saying, hey, just because you're under the law, don't think that you're not supposed to walk the way that you're supposed to. You don't use that as an excuse to walk any way that you want to. I think it's always a great reminder to look at this and see that God was very, very specific, and there was just nobody able to say, well, I didn't necessarily agree with that, so I kind of made it up as I went. When you read what happens with people that did that, they suffered some pretty severe consequence for it, right? So this person, it's like somebody up and dies right next to you, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I just broke my consecration. I didn't do that. I didn't intend to do that. I was just minding my own business, and that dude up and died next to me and ruined my consecration. Well, everything needed to be made whole again, and everything would start back over. Everything was broken, and that would have to start back over. Now, it doesn't say, after doing all that you can't go right back to it. It's just saying that consecration was broken at that time, though not by you, it was broken nonetheless. So you'd have to go through all of these consecration rites, and then it brings that one to an end, and if you wanted to, you're free to start all over again. Now, if that's involuntary that we just read there. Now, what about if it's voluntary? It's even more. Now, this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, and he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall present his offering to the Lord, one male lamb in its first year, without blemish, as a burnt offering. Now, if you want to look at the offerings, you'll notice that most of them are present in this. You can go back and get those in Leviticus. They all had different reasons. Some of them were to deal with sin. Some were to deal with fellowship and restoring things as far as them and the Lord. Those are actually mentioned in the latter part of this course of things. But you'll notice how many of these offerings come up at this time. So let's back up and just say a person just says, I'm going to abstain from all these earthly things, and I'm going to give myself completely to the Lord. And let's say that it's a year or whatever time it may be. And they say, my vow to do that doesn't mean I'm breaking fellowship with the Lord, but I'm going to end this vow of a Nazarite. I want to be able to shave my head, and I want to eat grapes, and I'd like a few raisins with my breakfast, and whatever. So at that time, if you're going to do that, here is how you end that vow and then go back into the normal part of your life. So we see there again in verse 14, there's this burnt offering. So again, verse 14, he shall present his offering to the Lord, one male lamb in its first year without blemish as a burnt offering, one ewe lamb in its first year without blemish as a sin offering, and one ram without blemish as a peace offering. So there are those three offerings. Again, not taking the time to do it, but if you want to, you can go back and find out what those different offerings were for and what they represented. They're detailed quite a bit in the book of Leviticus. Now, verse 15 says, a basket of unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and their grain offering along with their drink offerings. So these are the standard offerings, but they go on. Now, they are to deal with sin and trespass and all that kind of stuff. Anything that takes place, it is just the standard offerings that would be taking place, but it is to recognize the end of that particular covenant that they had made with the Lord, that consecration, And this is restoring them back to the normal course of things among the children. Interestingly enough, they were not able to partake in any kind of drink offering or any kind of drink at all. Now they give that as an offering. So it's reinstituting everything as its normal course. So then the priest will bring them before the Lord and offer his sin offering, and then offer his burnt offering. Then he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice, as a peace offering to the Lord. And with the basket of unleavened bread, the priest shall also offer its grain offering and drink offering. So it goes from the obligatory ones, the ones that had to be done, that all the children of Israel needed to. Some of these other ones were done in the voluntary sense, but they were a way of fellowshipping. These were the offerings of fellowship to the Lord. And so this still goes along with the idea of separation. So it tells us now the priest will offer its grain offering and drink offering at the end of verse 17. And then verse 18 says, then the Nazarite shall shave his consecrated head at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and he will take the hair from his consecrated head, put it on the fire which is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. So even sometimes when people would cut off things, they would keep some of it, cut off your hair and all that stuff. How many of you people still have little bits and pieces of your kid's first haircut? Still got that? In this case, if you want to say, man, I really wanted that as a trophy, sorry, it's going to get burnt up, because that consecration and everything, it was unto the Lord, and so you offer it back to him. It's not that you keep some of it for yourself. It's offered back to him. So it will be put as part of the peace offering. It'll be burned at that same time. Now, the priest will take the boiled shoulder of the ram, one unleavened cake from the basket, and one unleavened wafer, put them upon the heads of the Nazarite, and after he has shaved his consecrated hair, and the priest will wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Now that's going to come back up in chapter 8 as well. But a wave offering was a portion of the offerings, and the wave was it was put before the Lord as saying, this is yours, but then it was received back to the person that was offering it. But it was a way of just, in a visual sense, waving it before the Lord and say, this belongs to you, but you've allowed us to have. Well, that's what's taking place here. He will wave it as a wave offering before the Lord, and they are holy for the priest, together with the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering, after the Nazarite may drink wine. So restored back to the way that it was before. Now, this is the law of the Nazarite, who vows to the Lord the offering for his separation, and besides that, whatever else his hand is able to provide according to the vow which he takes. And so he must do according to the law of his separation. Bless you. Now, when we read this, we do recognize that this is instruction given to the children of Israel. Until this time, there wasn't anything in place. So if you were to go back and think Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, sons of Jacob, all of that stuff, none of this was there. There was no such thing. In this case, it is when God says, here is the person that takes the vow of Nazir, the Nazarite vow of consecration to the service of the Lord outside of priesthood. So priests were the group that God would use and chose for the service of the people and to the people. They were the ones that would work between man and God and bring the offerings and do all the rest. But if you weren't of Levi, and if you weren't of that age group and everything else, you could never do such a thing or put yourself in service to the Lord. You could through a Nazarite vow. Now, if somebody wanted to say today, well, I want to take a Nazarite vow. Okay, well, you're not under the law anymore, so good luck with when you end that thing, finding somebody to go ahead and do a wave offering for you and a whole bunch of these other things. You won't be able to do that. But if we wanted to consecrate ourselves to the Lord, we are actually supposed to do that. From the day that we are born again, your life is no longer your own if we genuinely understand what has taken place. So does it mean that we abstain from things? Well, yeah, there are plenty of things that we abstain from. They're just not as specific as these and all the rest, but step back from it even, way past all of that and say, since God doesn't give us a prescription of you have to obtain, or you have to abstain from vinegar and from wine and from grapes and raisins and all the rest of that stuff, we have no such thing like that spelled out for us in the New Testament. But the idea of separation and consecration, that is all throughout the New Testament. And so it is to say, my life as it was no longer is, once saved. Now it is dedicated, consecrated to the Lord, and it is to be holy. And guess what? It is something that God, from that moment on, doesn't expect you to say, okay, I'm done with my vow. No. It's supposed to be the whole time. It is a lifetime of your walk and your service to him. So, kind of cool, huh? It's funny, if somebody's ever come to me and say, I really want to take a Nazirite vow, it's like, why? What's wrong with the vow that you should have been, observing since the day that you got saved? Remember Romans 12, present yourself as a living sacrifice. And so that's holy and acceptable or consecrated, set apart to the Lord. Okay, now, I love this. In verse 22, I always think of Pastor Chuck when I read this. Okay, so look at what it says. And so the Lord spoke to Moses, and he said, speak to Aaron and to his sons, and say this, this is the way that you will bless the children of Israel, and you say to them. Now, make sure that we understand this. This is God saying, you tell Aaron and the priests, when they address the people on my behalf, here's how I want you to say to them. And here's the content of it. This is the bestowing, it's a benediction, it's the bestowing of a blessing on the people. So when you minister to them, I want you to do it like this. So he says, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Now, it would be one thing if you had some really great poetic Levite who thought, wouldn't it be nice if I just blessed the people in the name of God, and comes up with something like this? But please recognize what's going on here. This is God saying, I want you to say this on my behalf to the people. You Levites, you're my representatives, and here's how I want you from me to say to the people, and do this all the time. Did anybody find that as just being beyond cool? Now, we're not a covenant people in the same way as being under the law, but I guarantee you this, that this is the least that could be said of the believer, Jew or Gentile, doesn't matter, but God's faithfulness towards his people and his dedication towards us, right here, if God had come to me and said, I want you to say this to the people, it would have the same kind of impact and meaning. And really all of this, you could prove every last syllable of this in the New Testament. I could take you to chapter and verse where God says these things of you and to you. And you don't even need to go to the writings of the epistles and all the rest of it. You can find these kind of things in Jesus' own words. Pretty cool stuff. Again, the Lord bless you. I wish I could sing like he did. Or like Roger. Roger. My buddy Roger Cochran. I missed that man. But he used to sing this as well. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And so they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. So understanding the way that said, so the Levites will put on the people my name. That means they're bestowing the blessing in my name. It means that they're to set or to fix or to take upon. The people would be able to take upon because it's given to them the name of the Lord. And as a result, God says, I'll bless them. Now, if we stopped everything right there, and if we knew nothing else about the history, we would say, isn't this great? Because now God has bestowed his blessing upon the people, and there are a group of people that are taking these vows of consecration to him. God has his priesthood in place. Everything is perfect. But we got to read the rest of the Old Testament. We realize with all this benefit, they were still willful. And it tells you a little bit about human nature, doesn't it? Because we are still pretty willful today, and think of all of what we know and probably take for granted that they could have only dreamed of. Now, we don't see necessarily kind of the same miraculous stuff every single day, unless, of course, there's a pillar of fire that guides you by night and a cloud during the day that tells you where to go and all the rest. Does any of that stuff happen with you guys? All right. Ever get like a cloud that descends upon your house and God talks with you? Ever have that happen? If so, seek help. Or or it may be that you just got this incredible walk and I want to come over and check it out. Just invite me over. I want to see this. But at the same time, with all of that said, we may not see the miraculous things, but could you imagine telling these people, how would you like to never have to sacrifice another animal again? How would you like to have a one-time sacrifice done? How would you like to have a relationship with the God of heaven who became flesh and dwelt among us? You can even know him by name, and he will indwell you with his Holy Spirit. Would you exchange this for that? Just to see a cloud and a pillar? Yeah, I'll take what we've got. I'll take what we've got. And look back at this and marvel at it, that this is what God did with them. Chapter 7. Now this is pretty interesting, because once again, remember what we're reading here. It is going to be preparing them for what should have taken place is that, okay, we're out of your bondage. Remember, this is within the first less than 2 years of their time being taken out of the captivity. They've already been told how to arrange themselves in their encampments, and they're supposed to be able to break down camp. Everybody has their assigned task. They know in what order they're supposed to break down, and they'll move from place to place. They should be in the promised land in a couple of weeks. That's what should be taking place. This is all the preparation for that. Now we see this. There is the dedication that takes place. In verse 1 of chapter 7, we see, now it came to pass when Moses had finished setting up the tabernacle, that he anointed it and consecrated it with all of its furnishings and the altar and its utensils. And so he anointed them and consecrated them. And then the leaders of Israel, the heads of the fathers' houses, who were the leaders of the tribes, and over those who were numbered, made an offering. Now we're going to read about the offering. We're going to find some kind of interesting things that would be easy to miss if we went too quickly by them. So it says, and so they brought their offering before the Lord. There were 6 covered carts and 12 oxen, a cart for every 2 of the leaders, and for each one an ox. And they presented them before the tabernacle. And then the Lord said to Moses, accept these from them, that they may be used in doing the work of the tabernacle of meeting, and you shall give them to the Levites, to every man according to his service. So Moses took the carts and the oxen, and he gave them to the Levites. So here's what you have of the tribes providing for the Levites, because theirs was the ministry to the people. So it was something that they weren't to provide for themselves, but the surrounding tribes would be able to give them the things that they needed for their duties. Again, they've got to move this thing, and it has to be done in very careful order, but some of this stuff is heavy, and it has to get from place to place. It's been a long time since we did it. I think it was back in Exodus. But when we went through and looked at a life-size replica, it's out in the desert there in Israel, and you get an idea of the size of it, and the weight of it would have been enormous. So if you're carrying this thing, especially in the areas that they were, it'd be pretty tough. Though parts of it definitely were carried. We're going to see that in just a moment. So that was provided for the children, or for the Levites. Before I go any further, is there anybody up in the balcony right now? Oh, great. Can I have you put up that the arrangement of them? Thank you. I hadn't thought about it, but this would be a good time for it. It'll be just a second to pull that up. Oh, it's up there? Okay, cool. So you'll get a chance to see how they're going to be released, but what you have is now the consecrating of it. It is to be set up. All these different pieces have already been made. Remember, we looked at that in Leviticus, and so it was how it was all to be put together, all the way back in Exodus and then into Leviticus. And so all the pieces were there. Now it's time to put it up and to set it in place. And so this is what we're reading about now. Well, it tells us that in verse 8, the 4 carts, actually, I'm sorry, let's go to verse 6. So Moses took the carts and the oxen, gave them to the Levites. 2 carts and 4 oxen he gave to the sons of Gershon according to their service. 4 carts and 8 oxen he gave to Merari according to their service, under the authority of Ithamar, the son of Aaron the priest. Now, we can go back and look at that. We studied it last time that we were together, of the division of the 4 groups. That's 1 through 4 that were around the tabernacle. And those were the families of the Levites. And they all had different things that they were supposed to do. Now look at verse 10. In verse 9. But the sons of Kohath he gave none, because theirs was to be the service of the holy things which they carried on their shoulders. So that is like the Ark of the Covenant and the holy things that were in the holy place, right? So the other things were heavier, all the way down to the curtains and the tapestries and all that kind of stuff. That could be on the carts. Now, it's, I think, 2 Samuel 6 is where I believe it is. But that is where you will find Uzzah. That was the guy who tried to keep the cart, or the Ark of the Covenant, from falling off the cart. He was doing the right thing, right? Like, who wants to see that thing hit the ground? So he goes and touches it and dies on the spot. It never should have been on a cart. Never should have been on a cart. So people would go ahead and say, wait a minute, why was God so mean and let that guy die? Well, you basically would want to say, I can understand why he would have done that, but it never should have been on the cart in the first place. So the blame goes to the people that put it there. That should have been being carried, should have never been on a cart. And we have for it right here. We already know that they've been given that instruction, but look, they weren't given a cart by God, so the fact that they just decided to give it one later, oh, but it was a new cart. Oh, well, that changes everything, right? So when you go read that story, poor Uzzah, he's just doing the right thing, but he never should have been put in that position. Once again, is there wiggle room with God when he gives a command? There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. Sometimes the offense was immediate, even if unintended. Can you imagine if it was like that in the church today? You'd have a much smaller church. I guarantee that. Not just because everybody died, but it's like, no, man, I'm not going to sign up for that. That's way too serious. Boy, you would weed out the weak in that, wouldn't you? Honestly, it's a funny thing, because that I've talked with people who have gone into some very, very heavily oppressed places in the world and met with and talked with the churches there. And they say those are some of the most dedicated people you'll ever see. None of those people are playing a game. Why? Well, their very lives are at stake. So yeah, there's no pretense, there's no playing around, there's no ease of use to go to church. These people take their lives in their hands. That'll tend to purify you just a little bit, I think. Well, in verse 10, so now the leaders offered the dedication offering for the altar when it was anointed. And so the leaders offered their offering before the altar. For the Lord said to Moses, they shall offer their offering 1 liter each day for the dedication of the temple. So these again would be things brought by the heads of the tribes, and they would be brought then to the leaders there of the priesthood. And these would be things that would help with the implementation and the work around the sanctuary and around the tabernacle, I should say. So it says in verse 12, now this would be to the east. So it begins with the same way. If you go back and look at the first chapter, when it said, here's how you are to arrange your tribes around the tabernacle, he does the same repeating order here. So each day, and it's going to start with Judah to Issachar to Zebulun, and then skip over to Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, and that's what you'll see as it goes through. And it repeats what you see in chapter 1. Now, it goes on for a lot of verses, and they are redundant. So I'll read the first one, and we will stipulate that the rest are going to be there. But these are the same people that are mentioned in the first chapter from the same tribes. But the order is precise. And of course, it begs the question some people have asked, why would the writer have been so redundant to do the same thing? And yet we would look back on it and say, well, wouldn't it be great to have that kind of a reverence for God's word, that you wouldn't care how redundant it was? You're going to make sure that each of the tribes that are mentioned here, it shows that they all had an equal stake. And rather than mention one and just say, and the other 11 followed, it's very specific. So imagine being a kid growing up and very devout and having to transcribe the book of the law by hand. And you get to this chapter and go, oh man, writer's cramp. Well, it says, yeah, I'll get over it. Verse 12, and the one who offered his offering on the first day was Nahushan, the son of Amminadab of the tribe of Judah, and his offering was 1 silver plate the weight of which was 130 shekels, and 1 silver bowl and of 70 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Both of them were full of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering. Now, when you see this word shekel, we think coin. And coins have value to them. Some, like, take a look at the change if you have any of it in your purse or in your pocket, and you would say the actual weight of those things is, like a dime weighs less than a penny, but it's worth 10 times more. So it's not the denomination of the coin, it's the weight of it. So this was a way of them saying, how much did these different things, these plates and these bowls and these spoons, how much did they weigh? Weigh them in comparison to a shekel, because a shekel would have a weight to it, and that was how they had their denominations of coin, but it was based upon the weight. That's why it explains it this way. So it says in verse 14, and there was 1 gold pan and 10 shekels full of incense, 1 young bull, 1 ram, and 1 male lamb in its first year as a burnt offering, 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering, and for the sacrifice of peace offerings, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, 5 male lambs in their first year. And this was the offering of Nashon, the son of Amminadab. Now that was on one day. And that was brought as the offering of the tribe on behalf of the tribe by the head of that tribe, starting with Judah. So here to the east, notice the west is up there at the top, east. If you weren't here when we went through this, notice the shape of the tribes when they're there. Yeah, when you looked at it, you would say, it's a cross. To those people would say, what's a cross? But to us, we'd look back and say, all those things that were happening in the tabernacle were a shadow of what was to come, because all the things that were taking place in there were talking about the things that would happen in the person of Jesus, the one-time sacrifice, the one who was set apart and separated, and oh my gosh, all the things that are there. And so all the sacrifices and everything else were pointing to a time when they would no longer be necessary to be repeated over and over again. What would it take for that? It would take the cross. So it would only make sense to a time when people were put to death that way. They were not put to death that way back here at this time. There was no way that people were put to death by a cross. So that's what would be seen. How cool is that? It's like God telling you down the road, this is what's going to be taking place. Well, in verse 18, you'll see this. Now on the second day, Nathaniel, the son of Zoar, the leader of Issachar, he presented an offering. So again, take a look here at Judah, and the second in line is Issachar. And you're going to find that each one of these, it is the 4 groupings of 3 tribes. And the head of each tribe is going to bring the same offering. So when we get to the end of this chapter, you'll see that it's the same offering times 12. And so each one of the tribes would only be 1 per day, so that they don't get all lumped in. This was a 12-day kind of a festival that went on. So it would be the same things, yet it was not to be seen as the same, because it was different tribes representing different people. And these were the way that God, remember, again, if you weren't here, the way that they're arranged was not by these guys, not by the people there, because it wasn't like the people in Judah saying, well, I really like the people of Issachar, let's camp next to them. God's the one that said, north, south, east, and west, here's where you're going to stay. Even in the order that they stayed, from closest to the tabernacle to further away, so that no one could take credit for the way that it looked. God's the one who set it in place. So you see in verse 18, the second day. The third day is given to us in verse 24. And it was Eliab, the son of Helon, leader of the children of Zebulun. He presented an offering. So there you go, the third one in succession. So from Judah to Issachar to Zebulun. Now it jumps over in verse 30 to the south. Now, if you're not sure where the south is, notice the person that is going to be offering here in verse 30. It says, now on the 4th day, Eliezer, the son of Shadur, the leader of the children of Reuben, presented an offering. So that's to the south. We know that he was to the south. We get that from chapter 1, even though it's not here in this picture. You could still figure it out if you're really good with that kind of stuff, because you know you got west up at the top there, and you've got south or east at this, yeah. So you could go, okay, I can see right here, right? Okay. So On the fifth day, verse 36 tells us that Shalemiel, the son of Jerushadai, leader of the children of Simeon, presented an offering, and so you get that Reuben to Simeon. Now, of course, the next one would be Gad, right? So on the sixth day, Eliasaph, the son of Deuel, leader of the children of Gad, presented his offering. So this is going to be the repeated thing you see in verse 48 to the west, or so up at the top there. You're going to see Elishama, the son of Amminahud, leader of the children of Ephraim, presented an offering. So you're 7 days in, and you're now starting through the western progression of the families, or the tribes rather, and they are again bringing the same thing: the plates, the bowls, the spoons, the offerings of the grain, and all the rest of those things. They're all bringing the same thing each day. And they're bringing them because they're the supporting of the ministry to the people given to the Levites. Now, on the eighth day, verse 54, Gamaliel, the son of Pedazur, leader of the children of Manasseh, presented an offering. Now, again, if you remember, in case you weren't here for it, and if you've never heard anybody explain it, but you may be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, Jacob had 12 sons, but there's 13, and one of the sons of Jacob was not Manasseh, nor was it Ephraim. So how does that work? Joseph. Yeah, Joseph was given the double portion. So Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's sons. They took over 2 of the spots because there was going to be a spot open for Levi to deal with the priestly things. So 13 total, if you stop and think about it. Joseph represents, or has 2 of his sons represent his portion because of all the things that happened to him at the hands of his brothers. So once again, I know I've said it a million times, it became more abundantly clear to me in our study through the book of Genesis than ever before. It's like when you really study just the book and you're not doing anything else but that book, you just go, what a dysfunctional family. What a bunch of messed up dudes those guys were. And yet they're the sons of Jacob. They're the tribes of Israel. You would figure, pillars of society. Goodness, what a mess. And yet it shows us that God is able to take imperfect and sometimes very imperfect and use them to his glory. So, yeah, thank God for the rest of us, huh? So, on the 9th day, verse 60, Abidan, the son of Gideoni, leader of the children of Benjamin, presented an offering. And then moving to the north, in verse 66, on the 10th day, Ahiezer, the son of Menushadai, leader of the children of Dan, presented an offering. And on the 11th day, Pagiel, the son of Okran, leader of the children of Asher, presented an offering. And then in verse 78, it says, now on the 12th day, Ahira, the son of Enan, leader of the children of Naphtali, presented an offering. And so we get the summary of these things. Again, remember, they are repeated. So if you were to look under each of those names, you'll find it was the same things that were being offered. In verse 54, it says, now this was the dedication offering for the altar from the leaders of Israel when it was anointed. 12 silver platters, 12 silver bowls, 12 gold pans. Each silver platter weighed 130 shekels, and each bowl 70. And the silver of the vessels weighed 2,400 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The 12 gold pans filled with incense weighed 10 shekels apiece, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. All the gold of the pans weighed 130 shekels. Now, all of this being said to make sure that there is a good accounting of each. So again, these kinds of records, we might think, why is it necessary? They figured, why would we not keep record of these things? So they took very seriously what God had asked them to do. Verse 87, so all the oxen of the burnt offerings were 12 young bulls, the rams were 12, the male lambs in the first year 12, and the grain offering and the kids of the goats as sin offering was 12. All the oxen of the sacrifice of the peace offerings were 24 bulls, the rams 60, male goats 60, lambs of the first year 60, and this was the dedication offering for the altar after it was anointed. That was the kicking it off. Now that's a pretty large amount of animals. When you hear what they did when they replicated this and Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, it made this look like not much. I can't even begin to tell you what that city must have looked like and what would have been taking place. Because, I don't want to gross you all out, but the blood went somewhere. Thousands. Wow. Verse 89. Now, when Moses went into the tabernacle of meeting to speak with him, with the Lord, he heard the voice of one speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the two cherubim. Thus God spoke to Moses, spoke to him. Kind of a cool thing, of course, that we're getting this picture that God speaks from above mercy. Kind of a cool thing, because when you look at the law, you don't necessarily think mercy, but one of the most recognizable of all of the implements of the law was the Ark of the Covenant, and on the very top of it was the mercy seat. Pretty amazing when you stop to think about it, because again, it was a shadow of what was to come. Now, at chapter 8, we get this. Now, the Lord spoke to Moses, and he said, "Speak to Aaron, say to him, when you arrange the lamps of the 7 lamps, they shall give light in front of the lampstand." And Aaron did so. He arranged the lamps to face toward the front of the lampstand as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, the construction of this must have given it where, if you know, there was oil that was to be supplied to them at all times, they were never to go out. But somehow the configuration made it that you could project the light a little bit more, and how God tells him to do it, it was going to shed light more directly upon the bread on the other side. So all of the cool symbolism of that. Chapter 6 and chapter 8 of John, Jesus being the light of the world and the bread of life. There's a lot of symbolism that went in the tabernacle. I don't think you're having to stretch it too much to understand it, but that Jesus would be able to, bring light and focus on the fact of him being the bread of life. They couldn't have possibly even begun to grasp what they were seeing all the time. Well, it says in verse 4, "Now this was the workmanship of the lampstand, was hammered gold." I wish I'd thought about it. I have a picture of a replica of this. And they have it right there in the old city of Jerusalem so that you can get an idea. It's certainly not I don't believe that it's going to be anywhere close to as big as this. This thing would burn down the tabernacle. But they, in a temple, they could go with something much larger like this. Real quick. I don't know how many of you have heard me tell it, but our first trip to Israel, we went to the Temple Institute, rather. And the young man that was walking us around it had said, Solomon's temple was much smaller than the one that Herod had built. And so Solomon's was much more focused on the attention to detail in the service to God. And it was more concerned with of being a sanctuary that its focus was towards God. As far as Herod was concerned, let's make it big, let's make it grand. And so I asked the guy, I said, so what would you rather have? Would you rather have the big and grand that everyone can see, or would you rather have the one that's much more like Solomon? He said, we want both. Thus this big, huge lampstand. Could have probably functioned just quite well in Herod's, but who knows what it would look like in Solomon's. By the way, I remember doing this once before. I'm pretty sure that this sanctuary is pretty close to the size of Solomon's temple. With all of it, the outer courts, all that stuff. This basically the size of this building. So just so you know, get an idea of proximity and size and everything. All right. So anyway, verse 4. Now this workmanship of the lampstand was hammered gold, from its shaft to its flowers. It was one hammered work, according to the pattern which the Lord had shown to Moses. So he made the lampstand. That's taken from Exodus 25, around verse 40. So that was where it was given to them. So this was, notice what you see here. God says, tell Aaron to arrange it this way, and oh, by the way, here's what it looked like. It's giving the information in verse 4 of how it looked. Now, in verse 5, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now take the Levites from among the children of Israel and cleanse them ceremonially. And so you'll get this in Leviticus 8. This has already been told that that's what they were supposed to do, and now it is being done again. And thus you will do to them, cleanse them, sprinkle them of purification on them, let them shave their body, and let them wash their clothes, And so make themselves clean, and let them take a young bull with its grain offering of fine flour mixed with oil, and you will take another young bull as a sin offering. So this goes back to the consecration. It was basically the same thing again, taken from Leviticus 8. This is the repetition part of it. And remember, as a priest, this was always being done. If you fast forward to the book of Hebrews, you'll notice that what the writer of Hebrews is saying, in the person of Jesus, since he didn't have to do any of these things of cleansing himself, he was able to also offer himself, that it could be a one-time offering, never to need to be repeated. So the limitation that the last priesthood had is that it was mortal men. They were only able to serve for a time. They all died. They all needed to make an offering and cleansing for themselves before they could even represent the people. Jesus had no such limitations for a few reasons. First of all, he was perfect, which was a real bonus. But he's also, because he's from Judah, he didn't have to worry about being subject to the Levitical priesthood. God ordained him according to the order of Melchizedek, all the way back to Abraham's time. So Genesis 14. And that command is all the way back in Psalm 110, that he has made him a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. So when you fast forward into the book of Hebrews, around chapter 7 and then more in chapter 10, you have all of that Melchizedek tied up in a nice, neat, tidy little bow. We don't know a lot about him. He kind of comes out of nowhere in Genesis 14, mentioned only one other time in Psalm 110, but then Hebrews says it can't be anyone else, it's Jesus. Kind of cool, huh? All right. So this is what you're doing with the Levites. Jesus would have no such limitations, nor will he need to do these things repetitiously. So it says, and you will bring the Levites before the tabernacle of meeting, verse 9, and you will gather them, the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and so you shall bring the Levites before the Lord, and the children of Israel will lay their hands on the Levites. What usually happened when you laid your hand on something at that time? It wasn't going to be around long. You were doing that with the animals, right? So the Levites, are they going to sacrifice the Levites? No, they were to be living sacrifices. Wait a minute, living sacrifices. Haven't I heard that somewhere before? Yeah. Holy, acceptable before God. We are to be living sacrifices, Romans 12:1. All right, well, here in the same way, since they were not to be sacrificed, but they themselves were living sacrifices, so the people, like they would do with the animals that was to the transferal of guilt, this was also the same thing of them putting their hands on the priest. You're going to represent us before the Lord. This was the commissioning part of it. So Aaron will offer the Levites before the Lord like a wave offering from the children of Israel, that they may perform the work of the Lord. So the wave offering, remember again, it was taken from a literal sacrifice, but it was the piece that remained. It wasn't burnt up. It was being given to the priests, and they would wave it before the Lord in the way of recognition. Yet again, this belongs to you, Lord, but you have given it to us. So we give it to you, but you give it back to us. Well, so it was with the Levites. Basically the same thing. Now, he didn't grab all the guys and start waving them in front of the Lord. It would be like a wave offering. I mean, that would be like really impressive if you could do that. But that wasn't what it was supposed to be. So then the Levites, they will lay their hands on the heads of the young bulls. And then you will offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering to the Lord to make atonement for the Levites. So you get it? The people upon the Levites, they were offered back to the Lord as a wave offering. This is yours, but you've given it to us. They then would put their hands onto the animals, and then they were given as these offerings. So there's as hard as any of, if this was something that was still going on, this would be a really difficult field trip to go watch, wouldn't it? It'd be a tough thing to watch. And at the same time, there's an incredible beauty to this, in the way that God puts all of these things together, because it was speaking to something future which would make this unnecessary in the person of Jesus. So you see the beauty of it. Well, in verse 13 it says, and you will stand the Levites before Aaron and his sons in verse 13, and then offer them like a wave offering to the Lord. Verse 14, thus you will separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites will be mine. After that, the Levites will go into the service of the tabernacle of meeting, and so you shall cleanse them, and you will offer them like a wave offering, for they are holy, given to me from among the children of Israel. I have taken them for myself instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of the children of Israel. So these are the ones that are offered back to me for my service, right? So it wasn't just the firstborn of a family that was to be dedicated or consecrated to the Lord. This was an entire group of people, the males of that group. And so it tells us in verse 16, so they were wholly given to me from among the children of Israel, and I have taken them for myself instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of the children of Israel. For all the firstborn among the children of Israel are mine, both man and beast, on the day that I struck all the firstborn out of the land of Egypt and sanctified them to myself. I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn of the children of Israel. And I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron. So Aaron is among them. He's from the tribe of Levi. But there are his sons who serve in that capacity as the heads or the priests, and the Levites are the ones who are doing the day-to-day of things, even from just the offerings of things, or also for the necessary maintenance and the keeping of the tabernacle. So it says in verse 19, and I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and the sons from among the children of Israel, to do the work of the children of Israel and the tabernacle of meeting, and to make atonement for the children of Israel, that there be no plague among the children of Israel when the children of Israel come near to the sanctuary. So there's a lot of things implied in that. When they come near to the sanctuary means they're doing it because God has ordained it, and they're being obedient to what God has said. There won't be plagues as long as they do the things that they're supposed to do. Well, verse 20 says, thus Moses and Aaron and the congregation of the children of Israel did to the Levites according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses concerning the Levites, and so the children of Israel did to them. Then the Levites purified themselves, they washed their clothes, and Aaron presented them like a wave offering before the Lord. They're the same as, in similitude. And then Aaron made atonement for them to cleanse them. And after the Levites went in to do their work of the tabernacle of meeting with Aaron and his sons, as the Lord had commanded Moses concerning the Levites, so they did to them. And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is what pertains to the Levites, from 25 years old and above, that they may enter and perform service in the work of the tabernacle of meeting. And at the age 50 years, they will cease performing this work, and they shall work no more. They may minister to their brethren in the tabernacle of meeting, to attend to needs, but they themselves shall do no work. Thus you shall do to the Levites according to their duties. Now, it's very general what's said there. What would be the difference of being able to serve somebody but not be a work kind of a thing? 50 was the max. Now, if you were here for chapter 4, you would say, wait a minute, there in chapter 4 it says 30 years. Why is it now 25 here? There's a discrepancy of 5 years, and there are a few things that are proposed here. Some would say scribal error that we've had in the manuscripts over the years. Some would say, turns out that they didn't need as many people as they thought, so they were able to move it to 30 years from 25. There's a whole lot of different speculation there. Some would say it's a tradition that they had an apprenticeship that took 5 years. There are a lot of things that are speculated, but here's the one thing that I'm pretty sure that it is, well, I know this, God is the one who said it. In chapter 4 and in chapter 8, you will find the exact same thing. The Lord said, and he gives this instruction. So the easiest answer, and it's the one that's probably the most frustrating, is we don't know. God does not give us any detail. If it's anything even from scribal error to something changed, if there was something that changed from chapter 4 to chapter 8 and God refocuses it, or if he did the whole apprentice thing and just never gave us the details, we have no way of knowing. But this is one of those places that people say, oh, the Bible's so full with contradictions. And then they point out stuff like that. You basically say, okay, if I came up with a satisfactory answer, please explain to me how that changes anything. They were still capped at 50 years. Not capped as in they got burned up and killed. Capped as in they were done with their service. So it was either for 25 years or for 20 years. We're not given the explanation as to why, but in case somebody ever blindsides you with that, well, what? One says 25 and the other one says 30. What's the difference? I don't know. The text doesn't tell us. It doesn't change anything about their service. Isn't that funny? I don't care if it's 25 or 30. Show me where it changes what they're supposed to do. If there was a detail that we were supposed to know, if it was God who actually did instruct them and it wasn't some scribal error, God had his reasons. He just didn't tell them to us. What does it matter? They were still doing the exact same thing without alteration. Interesting, huh? We're going to end a couple of minutes early because there's no way to get into the whole next chapter. So let's stand and let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you once again for your word. And as we study what is a historical document, and it is also helping us in our understanding of how you did the things that you did. We don't understand it entirely, and we know that we are given big picture things here. What we do ask, Lord, is that it would help us in our remembrance that you are a holy and a perfect God, and you do expect things of your people. We would ask, Lord, that we would be in a place of obedience to you, recognizing that consecration of the believer isn't something that's optional. And it is also not for us to make it up as we go, because you've given specific instructions. May we present ourselves to you as consecrated people for your service. We thank you and we give to you all praise in Jesus' name.